Yo, what's going on? It's your boy Kenny T, and this episode is the Airplane Flying Handbook, Chapter 7, which revolves around ground reference maneuvers. So when we talk about ground reference maneuvers, we're going to talk in this area, and some of this stuff may not apply to you if you're a private student, but we're going to cover most of the different subjects in this area. So that's going to be talking about the reference to the ground reference, drifting ground track, the rectangle course, turns around a point, S turns, 8s on pylons, and then some common areas. Those are the ones we're going to talk about. And in the airplane flying handbook, remember, this is talking generically about how you do the maneuvers regardless of the airplane. When you get to whatever airplane you're flying, it's going to be very specific. But this is to give you the overview of what these maneuvers are, how to do them, in a generic sense. And that's what the airplane flying handbook is. Overall, what is it that you do? What are the commonalities of how you're trying to do it? So let's go ahead and roll into it. So why is this important? So you need to understand how the airplane reacts to wind and how the control inputs and low altitudes are going to be applied when you're flying these ground reference maneuvers. And this builds real good precision and precise work when you're working on your pattern, approaches, and landing. So you got to understand how to adjust for drift, how to maintain proper ground track, and that's going to be real critical for safety and precision when you're flying. So that's why we practice these maneuvers, and that's why you got them in the ACS. The key goals here is maintain constant altitude, airspeed, and ground track, using the visual references to be able to adjust your course and be able to identify what the airplane's actually doing. You want to develop coordinated control of the aileron, rudder, and the throttle when doing each of these maneuvers. So let's talk a little bit just about drift and ground track. Okay, so drift is the sideways movement of the airplane caused by the wind. So if you don't correct drift properly, the airplane is going to end up, a ground chopper is not going to match its intended flight path. So if you look at this here, we got this diagram. And we use a boat as an example just to give you a different reference because it applies to flying just as it does in boating. If you got no drift, you can fly straight with no correction, same like boating. But if you're in the water and you're trying to cross from one side to the other, if the river's flowing from left to right and you just point the nose at the other side of the shore, the boat's going to move to the right. No different than if you do it in an airplane, the airplane is going to drift to the right. And that's why we look at the last block, when you put the correction turned into where the wind is, or where in the boat example, where the current's coming from, you point the nose to the left in the direction of where it's coming from, and it'll offset the drift that is caused by the current. And in the airplane, from the wind. And that's how you keep the proper ground track, by turning into the wind and correcting for drift. And that's called your wind correction angle. So you say, point your nose in the direction of the wind. The stronger the wind, the more you got to turn into it. Or one maneuver they cover here in the airplane flying handbook is rectangle course. The reason rectangle course is important because this is what you're doing when you're flying in the traffic pattern. Setup field, you're going to fly the airplane between 6 and 1,000, and the traffic pattern is 1,000 feet AGL. You enter the course, and when you're downwind, let's pull this up here. So when you're downwind, you're going to crab into the wind to offset the drift. So turn into the wind. Maintain the constant ground track that parallels reference point. You can tell if you got enough crab in because you'll either see you're going further away from your intended path. So if you're looking at the runway, if you're going further away from it, you move close to it, then you don't got enough crab angle into it. You want to make sure that you're still flying parallel, even though you're pointed at an angle that's cant to the ground track that you're going for. Then when you turn, make your turn into the base leg, depending on which way it's coming. If you have a tailwind, you're going to end up going way faster. If you have a headwind, you're going to go way slower. So if you're going way slower, you're going to have to make sure that you're going to make a slower turn as you turn to final. If you have a tailwind and you push fast, you got to make a steeper turn so you don't overshoot going into final. And then when you turn final, you can roll out on a consistent distance from that reference point. So when you're looking at the ground, if you're flying a reference point, if you're looking at traffic pattern, look at the reference point that's on the ground that lines up. So you line up on it and keep that track as you're heading into final or into the runway. And when you're making your turns, make sure you're smooth and coordinated. So you use a rudder and your aileron together to make a smooth turn. Next, we're going to talk about turn around a point. So we're looking at turn around a point. Turn around a point, essentially, you're making a turn, you maintain your altitude, and you're just adjusting bank in order to fly a circle around a particular point. And being that there's wind there, you're going to have different corrections to make sure that you're properly maintaining the right distance. So you pick altitude between 600 and 1,000 feet. maintain the constant altitude and airspeed. When you first enter, if you're entering with a headwind, you're going to start with a steep bank because the headwind's going to push you towards your point. So you got to hurry up and get through that turn so you make a steeper bank. And then as you get around that turn, you're parallel to the point that you're flying around, you're going to have the most steep bank you're going to have as you roll out. Now, as you continue around and you start to have that wind pushing you further away, you're going to shallow that bank and then start to roll out and get to flying right into the wind to line yourself back up on your starting point. So you'll fly a circle. One way I like to do this as a technique is as I'm entering the point, I look at 4 points that are around the point that I'm flying around and make sure that as I'm going through the turn that I'm flying over each of those points. Now, not saying that you should just fly it like that, but that gives you some good get well points to let you know if you're too close in, if you're too far out, how's your bank doing. It's kind of to help you check yourself out, make sure you're doing good while you're doing your turns around a point. Next thing they talk about in the airplane flying handbook is the S-turns. So your S-turns, you're essentially going to fly over a road, you're going to make a turn, you're going to go back wings level and be flying the opposite direction of the road, make a turn to the opposite direction, make another turn, and then end up back wings level over the same road in the direction that you started, but further down the line. Now, when you're doing this, similar to the other ground reference maneuvers, you can be between 600 and 1,000 feet. And you're going to enter the maneuver downwind, a side with a 90-degree angle. So you're going to start going faster when you hit the road. When you hit the road, because you're going faster over the ground, you're going to start to make a steeper bank as you head around. When you look at it, your wings should still point to where that road's at. If you start to see that you're drifting far out, you don't have enough a bank in, and you need to increase that bank. And as you come back around, heading the opposite direction, you're going to slowly start to take out that bank so that as you get back over the road, your wings are level over the road. And as soon as you hit that road, bank, look to the right and start that bank. And it's going to be a little bit shallower because you're going slower because you got a headwind now. So now the airplane is moving slower across the ground. So you make that turn and you'll look to see where the wing is pointed at. If you're starting to get too close to the road, decrease some of that bank so the airplane keep drifting out, and then slowly make that adjustment to come back around until you're back to parallel, parallel to the road and, perpendicular to the road, and you're back to the same direction that you started the maneuver in. And this maneuver takes a lot of practice. So when you're practicing this, you'll get a lot of practice in this in a private pilot because you'll do a bunch of turns around a point every other flight or something to that effect as you're getting into the maneuvers. Next maneuver is eights on pylons. If you're a private pilot, you don't even need to worry about this because it's going to hurt your brain, because eights on pylons is a really tricky commercial maneuver. But for my commercial students and for my CFIs, you got to make sure that you understand what is called the pivotal altitude. And what's the pivotal altitude? Pivotal altitude formula for that is, let's pull it up so we don't start making stuff up. All right, so when we look at what our pivotal altitude is, it's going to be the ground speed squared over 11.3, or you can just look at this chart here. The chart tells you what it is. If you don't got to do math, don't do math. I got a degree in math. I could easily do math, but I've learned that don't do math when you don't have to. Just copy down what your ground speed is for different options, and then know what the pivotal altitude is. And so to do this maneuver, you're going to set yourself up by finding 2 ground reference points about a half a mile apart, something like that, and then fly that pivotal altitude that we just calculated. You begin with the shallow angular bank as you're heading going towards a beam, the point. Now with this maneuver, unlike turn around points, you adjust your distance from a point by adjusting your bank. But with this, you actually use your pitch to adjust your ground speed, because you're checking the altitude, to adjust how far you are from the point. So when you have a high ground speed, you need a high pivot altitude. So you're going to have to pitch up and climb, and you'll be at a slower altitude. You slow yourself down, and as you're headed with a lower ground speed, so lower pivotal altitude, that's that second point, you're going to start to pitch up. As you come around, you're going to start to gain altitude, and then you're going to start to descend. When you got the wind coming from your right, you descend and fly back around, and then you'll start this maneuver from the opposite side. On the opposite side, you'll be lower, which will be a lower pivotal altitude, and lower pivotal altitude equals a higher airspeed, or excuse me, a lower airspeed. So the lower you are, the lower your airspeed needs to be to maintain that pivotal altitude. And pivotal altitude is what you need to pivot around that point, and you're adjusting the ability to pivot around that point based on your altitude. As you come back around 90 degrees, you'll start to climb again, and you'll climb back around till you get back to the beginning of the maneuver and then start it back over. And then we have our turns around the point. This one actually should have came before. So turns around the point is essentially just flying around in a circle, just like we kind of talked about. I think I already talked about that. Disregard. So the common errors when you're looking at your ground reference maneuvers is poor wind correction. So you're not crabbing into the wind properly, which leads to drifting off track. To fix it, increase or decrease the wind correction. It takes practice. You got to learn to finesse this and figure it all out. Inconsistent altitude. If you're losing altitude, you can end up having a too shallow bank or poor back pressure. You got to do a lot of balancing when you're doing these ground reference maneuvers. So to fix this if you have inconsistent altitude is lock in and make sure that you're paying attention to the back pressure, the forward pressure that you have in the aircraft, and the aircraft is trim. Uneven turn radius. Sometimes you might need to get wider downwind or tighter upwind to make sure that you're even as you're flowing through the turns on each of these different maneuvers. And if you're uncoordinated flight, so make sure that as you're going through the turn that you're not slipping or skidding. So you make sure that the ball is centered throughout every single maneuver. So in closing, that's it for ground reference maneuvers. This exercise some of the most important building blocks for you to learn how to do ground reference maneuvers and to do all the other maneuvers and be a competent, safe pilot and be able to have full control of the aircraft. But that's the Airplane Flying Handbook summary of Chapter 7. Thank you. Kilo Tango